Good evening, everyone. Welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update today, the 11th of March 2015. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update is sponsored by our major sponsor, Campbell Scientific Australia, when measurements matter. So much to get through today, so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of why things are moving the direction they're moving. We're just going to go into the direction they're expected to move and get on with the job here. We've got Tropical Cyclone Pam, Category 4, going to become a Category 5, no doubt about it, 100% certainty it'll be a Category 5. And it will unfortunately track right over the top of it today. The computer models have been pushing it further and further west each and every time, and it is very disappointing to see, but it is expected now to get right over the top of the southern islands of Vanuatu, which is very concerning and possibly, or almost certainly, a life-threatening situation there for that area. We'll talk about that shortly. Tropical Cyclone Nathan looks pretty terrible at the moment. A lot of wind shear on this system, as we mentioned in the subscriber update this morning. About 30 to 40 knots worth of wind shear over the top of Nathan, and being offset, of course, by around about 20 to 30 knots of upper level divergence, which is assisting in at least holding the thing in place. But it's certainly not intensifying anytime soon with that sort of level of wind shear. Now, wind shear will drop over Nathan, and Nathan will intensify. It's just a matter of when, and we just hope that it doesn't completely die out in the meantime, and I don't think it will. Over here we've got Tropical Cyclone Olwyn. Tropical Cyclone Olwyn was only named a couple of hours ago. Olwyn is a Category 1, but you can see here it's impressive satellite signature starting to develop across around Olwyn. Olwyn is in a very, very ideal spot for development over the next 24 hours until it sort of gets close to the coast, and by the time it gets close to the coast, right on the coast or just before it, it does look like there's a lot of wind shear out here in this area. But in the meantime, over the next 24 hours, I would not be surprised to see Olwyn intensify rapidly over the next, as I said, 24, maybe 36 hours even. Pam is the life-threatening cyclone. I know it's not an Australian one, but we would be remiss if we didn't cover it. Here is the latest forecast track map from the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre. We can see here if the system travels directly to the south, it might just happen to miss the southern islands here of Vanuatu, and hopefully also the capital of Vanuatu as well. We don't want it hitting that especially. But at the moment the system is traveling in a south-southwesterly direction, which is really, really not good. We need to see it stop that south-southwesterly motion immediately and start to travel in a south, or even preferably a south-southeast motion. So we can see here that through the day the models have just continuously moved westwards with this system. At the 13th at 06, it's expected to be gusting to about 300 and something kilometers an hour. It's a massive Category 5, folks. There's no doubt about this. You certainly don't want to be in this path. The system began developing an eye earlier today, and it seems to have lost that eye in the last few frames. Now, that's not to say it's weakening in any way, shape, or form, but we will need to see a real, a strong eye with a strong eye wall around it. So to do that, we need to pierce it through microwave imagery, and if we take a look at the microwave image, we can see a pretty massive eye with a fairly strong eye wall, or very strong eye wall around it to the northwest and west. We just need to see that eye wall tighten up here on the southeastern quadrant, and once we get that, we'll have a very symmetrical system with an extremely intense core. The Sims shear product tells us that we're looking at the system in somewhere between 20 and 30 knots of westerly vertical wind shear, and that might account for the amount of convection that's located out here, or displaced out here to the west of the actual eye itself. So here's the eye, and the bulk of the convection is actually located well west of the eye. Now, that's not to say it doesn't have a very tight and strong eye wall. It's just that as the convection grows, it does get sheared away here to the west, and that's because of the vector here shown in the diagram, which pushes the convection away to the west. No love for the GFS ensemble on Vanuatu at all here. This is crossing, smashing into the islands here as a Category 4 or 5 tropical cyclone. Very little doubt here. Very tight agreement on the computer model guidance from the GFS, and pushes it just west of the JTWC track, which means it's right on track to hit the Vanuatu Islands. CMC, as we would expect, not quite as tight agreement, but still generally in that same area. This is going to be a system that's very large, but the core is going to be very tight. Similar to a system like Haiyan, similar to a system like Yassi, where we had a very, very big system, large system in area, but a very tight core. And if you happen to be in that core, oh, it's not good. If you happen to be outside of it, however, you tend to get away with just some fairly strong winds, obviously gale force, storm force winds, but with limited damage from the actual core itself, or from the really strong winds that you'd find in the core. Maximum impact on Vanuatu on the CMC expected to be in 2 days, and the GFS also expecting to see maximum impact on Vanuatu in anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 days. Alright, we're going to go to the west now. We're going to look at Tropical Cyclone Olwyn. Tropical Cyclone Olwyn was named at 2 p.m. WA time. It's expected to track in a southerly direction. The Bureau are taking a fairly conservative approach at its intensification. I would not be surprised at all if by tomorrow afternoon we're looking at something a little bit more significant than a Category 1 cyclone, especially given that the current track is pushing it right through an area of very low vertical wind shear and very good upper level divergence. So here's the upper level divergence. We've got 20 knots. So what do we need this for? Well, we need it to create an exhaust system for the cyclone. So the cyclone's thunderstorms grow tall, and at the top of the atmosphere, we need something to get rid of all the mass that's being produced at the top from those storms. So to get rid of that mass, we need an exhaust system. Anytime we get anything more than about 20 on this chart means we've got a fairly good exhaust system. And now if we take a look at the wind shear product from SIMS, we can see that the system is about to, over the next 12 to 24 hours, track into beautiful conditions. Really, really ideal conditions. High levels of upper level divergence, very low levels of vertical wind shear. Excellent possibility for the exhaust system to get rid of any mass that's being produced by those storms, both in the northern and in the southern southern parts of the system. Normally one of those outflow channels is available. This looks like we're going to have 2 outflow channels available because we've got high levels of vertical shear to the south, high level of vertical shear to the north, which means that the upper level winds will displace any mass that's produced. I really do think that this has all the makings of a fairly quickly intensifying tropical cyclone in the next 24 hours. The Bureau are not as confident as me on that. They're producing a very, very slowly intensifying system over the next 24 to eventually 36 hours. It gets into a Category 2 status, possibly at the higher end of Category 2 status. Now, one of the things to note is that on that current track, we do see an increase in vertical shear as it approaches the coast. So it might actually hit its maximum intensity in around about 24 to 36 hours time, with a landfall in 36 to 48 hours time. The GFS ensemble is in very tight agreement here of the system tracking away to the south-southwest and making landfall on or around that northwest Cape area, around the Exmouth to Onslow region, possibly just west of Onslow, possibly just east of Exmouth is where the actual guidance is taking it. Very tight agreement also from the European ensemble. The CMC ensemble, not as tight agreement there, but it hardly ever does have excellent agreement. So the fact that they're all within a couple of 100 kilometres of each other is a pretty excellent agreement for this particular computer model. So folks, there is very little doubt here that it's going to affect WA directly. And also the thing to note here on the CMC model is it does intensify the system probably in the 970 to 980 hectopascal mark by the time it gets to the coast. This 990 is an ensemble mean. So here's the trend of the system through the day. You can see the convective banding around the system has certainly shown signs of intensification. There's deep convection right around the core. There's also deep convection coming in on the feeder band, so some very heavy rain in these feeder bands as well, if you happen to be lucky to be under one. And we've got the enhanced infrared here. It looks a little bit of a meal here on the enhanced infrared. I would suspect that overnight tonight, remember this is WA, so it's a couple of hours behind the Queenslanders, so this is around about the diurnal minimum for their convection. That means storms really struggle on the ocean at around about this time of day for them. Overnight tonight, early tomorrow morning, I think we'll really see whether or not this system can tap into those really favourable environmental conditions and bomb out a little bit over the next 24 hours. If we haven't seen any real intensification by tomorrow morning, well, you know, the conditions don't really become any more favourable than that. I don't think it's really possible to get any more favourable than that. So I really do think that we're going to see some type of fairly rapid intensification at some stage of this system in the next 24 hours or so. Let's take a look at the effects, the wind effects. Now, obviously, anything in the red is a really, really strong wind, and don't be out on the water. Now, we can see here, we're only taking you out to about Thursday evening, but you can see that system now tracking in a almost south-southwest motion, pretty well exactly what you're seeing on the track map, albeit maybe slightly further to the west, but you're seeing here Barrow Island's getting raked, so too is Onslow, so too is Exmouth. Really nice little tight core system here with some fairly strong winds. Particularly, I think you'll find the strongest winds will be just in that southeastern quadrant or the eastern quadrant, with those winds coming in from the north, wrapping around the system. The reason we have that is the fact that we've got a bit of a ridge over the top of WA and Central Australia, and there is a fairly tight pressure gradient there between the ridge and the cyclone itself, and so that's probably why we're going to see the strongest winds there in the southeastern quadrant. Unless, of course, if the system does bomb out over the next 24 hours, we might actually see a fairly symmetrical system where, in fact, it might be quite strong on all four quadrants. And you can see, in fact, that as we overlay the rainfall with the wind, we can actually see that not only is the wind going to be in the strongest in the southeastern quadrant, but you're also looking at 6-hour totals of over 50 millimeters in that southeastern quadrant. So the area here that we're talking about is this area here on our charts to the southeast of the actual eye of the cyclone. We're going to see the strongest winds, and we're also going to see much heavier rain than anywhere else in the system. You start to see that heavy rain by Thursday morning, expecting to start to hit Barrow Island. So you can see Barrow Island there in that purple. And then as we continue to track that rainfall and the strong winds, you can see Barrow Island continuing to receive very heavy rainfall. And then it starts to hit the coast around early to mid-afternoon. We can see that the heaviest rain starts to hit the coast around Onslow and then starts to push west towards Exmouth as we go to tomorrow night. That's where we'll leave the animation, but in the morning with the subscribers, we'll talk about this animation a little bit more, and we'll also give you another view of that tomorrow night for those of you in WA when it's money time in terms of the cyclone crossing. And now that we head over to the eastern part of Australia and we talk about Tropical Cyclone Nathan. Now, Tropical Cyclone Nathan is one of the biggest teasers of a cyclone we've seen for a while. Tropical Cyclone Nathan will hover and meander about just off the coast, just annoying everyone, because it's not going to produce all that much rain anywhere south of about Innisfail or Ingham, actually. And it's going to, just be a bit of a pain here for us because we can't figure out whether to chase it or not. You can see here the bulk of Tropical Cyclone Nathan's actual rainfall, believe it or not, is just to the northwest of the system. So even though you've had heavy rainfall here along the coast, it's certainly nothing in comparison to what's been happening just to the northwest of the system. Now, we'll have a look at Nathan in a little bit more detail in terms of its structure, but you can see here that the general idea is that the system will maintain its strongest, not so much strongest winds, but strongest rainfall echoes up here to the north. We do see a clearance tomorrow, by around tomorrow night, of any rainfall south of about Townsville or Bowen. So at this stage, enjoy the rain while you can, for those of you that have had some. But really, folks, this is a rain producer, certainly. But in terms of actual crossing the coast, there's very little evidence to suggest it's going to. But hell, it's going to get really, really close. All right, let's take a look at his structure. In terms of its satellite structure, actually, let's have a look at its satellite first. It's certainly on the uglier end of a Cat 2. We haven't seen too many this ugly for a while. Take a look at the enhanced infrared. You can see that all of its convection is being driven away to the west, while the system, the actual cyclone, is on that eastern edge of that convection. And we see the same here on FunkTop imagery, where FunkTop, by the way, just shows us where the areas of strongest rainfall lie. Now, once we pierce all that rubbish on satellite, we see that we really have a sick-looking tropical cyclone here. If it hadn't been named, it would probably be struggling to get to Cat 1. But obviously, we're not looking at the ASCAT, so we're not actually looking at the surface winds here. We're just looking at the structure of the system itself. It absolutely looks like a dog's breakfast at the moment. It looks rubbish. If we have a look at exactly why it looks rubbish, well, it's lying under about 30 knots of vertical wind shear. That's just way too much for a tropical cyclone to contend with. So we've got a situation here where the vertical shear is pushing all of that rain and storm activity away to the west, away from the cyclone center. And you can see here the direction of the shear with the little arrows. And so you can see it's all being sheared away to the west. The area that's really favorable here for wind shear is a lot further south, but unfortunately the cyclone isn't expected to get that far south. It's only expected to sort of meander around where it is now. And to be honest, the SIMS shear analysis products suggest that we're looking at very unfavourable conditions in terms of wind shear for the next 24 hours, and this is what the VU here stands for. The next 24 hours we're looking at very unfavourable wind shear at around about 17 metres per second, which is just horrendous for a tropical cyclone. The Bureau maintain on their technical outlook, though, that Tropical Cyclone Nathan should continue to intensify during today and into Thursday as it moves into a more favourable environment for further development. I just can't see that favourable environment yet at the moment. Unless that wind shear lowers and lowers dramatically, I can't see this thing intensifying anytime soon. So it would certainly, the earliest it could intensify would probably be tomorrow, and only if that vertical wind shear dropped. And at the moment, there's no real signs of that dropping. And look at that. This is a shear tendency product. So what we're looking at here is a number value in terms of how the wind shear has changed in the last 24 hours or so. A negative number value, very good. A positive number value, very bad. And you can see that the system is lying in an increasingly sheared environment. So not only is the shear high, it has actually been increasing through the day, which is very negative for this particular system in terms of where it's located environmentally. So normally that wind shear is enough for us to go, no way, this thing's dead. The only thing keeping us interested in this cyclone is the fact that there's a very efficient exhaust system. That wind shear is actually creating a very efficient exhaust system for it. And so that 40 knots of wind shear is being offset by 20 knots or 30 knots of upper level divergence. So in real terms, that 40 knots of wind shear is probably more around 15 to 20 knots of shear once you account for such an efficient exhaust system over the top of the cyclone. So thankfully, it's not all negative. There are some saving graces in it. All right, let's talk track forecast. Pretty clear guidance here, folks. It's going to track here very, very close to the coast of the peninsula, and then eventually do a bit of a U-ey and go out here to the southeast or east-southeast and head out into the Coral Sea. Now, there are some computer model guidances that are not pushing this system as far east as some of the others. So here is the GFS forecast ensemble. We can see the system overall expecting to track in a southeast direction, but there is a key distinction as to whether it goes out here or whether it goes much closer to the Queensland coast here. Now, a lot of that will depend on the depth of the system. So if the system is a fairly weak cyclone, it may not get pushed as far as we're looking at. The other option also, of course, is that how long will it be under the influence of an upper level trough? Now, we're not going to go into steering influences here. Just be aware that there is a distinct variation here, or variability, in the long-term forecast guidance. Not the short-term stuff. The short-term stuff's all pretty set in stone. It's expected to hover, 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 and then track away to the east, at least in the short to medium term. Now, what happens after day 4? Is where the models diverge. So some of them will push it south, or maybe even southwest back towards Queensland. Some of them will push it, or most of them will push it southeast out into the graveyard, and possibly once again, goodness me, I hope not, but once again some of the computer models do push it near Vanuatu and certainly near New Caledonia. Exactly the same thing shown by the CMC model, although the CMC model is a little bit more intent on tracking it away here to the southeast and into the graveyard, while giving New Caledonia a bit of a touch-up in the meantime. Good agreement from the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre. Pretty obvious there to the track. There is still that error margin that might push it just onto the coast, anywhere north of Cooktown, probably around that Cape Melville area. So there is still that outside chance that it might push just a little further to the west, especially with the amount of wind shear tracking away, tracking that convection away. The low-level circulation centre might try and position itself a little closer to that convection. We're not sure, but look, even if that happens, we're only talking a marginal impact here in terms of a direct hit, and then the system will then start to track away to the east. Now, throwing this a little bit out of whack is the intensity forecast. Because it's under so much shear at the moment, the intensity forecast is problematic. The reason it's problematic is because obviously a more intense system will be driven and directed by a different steering level flow. A less intense system will be driven and directed by a lower level steering flow. So it's certainly up in the air in the longer term, and that's why you're seeing such divergence in the computer models as to whether they want to push it out here to the graveyard or whether they want to push it a little bit closer to the coast and maybe come back for a bit of another touch up on the Queensland coast. Always fascinating with Aussie cyclones, always interesting. Take care, folks, if you are under blue alert or what is likely to become yellow alert tomorrow. Make sure you're taking those precautions in WA. And Queenslanders, just keep an eye out on the Queensland system. Our thoughts are with the people in Vanuatu. If you do have friends and family in Vanuatu, particularly in those southern islands, please, please, please make sure they're aware that this life-threatening monster is on the way. Talk again tomorrow.